The Nazi hypothermia experiments. During World War II, Nazi doctors conducted hypothermia experiments on concentration camp prisoners to study the effects of extreme cold and ways to re-warm victims. Subjects were stripped naked and immersed in ice water or left outside in freezing temperatures until near death. Researchers then tested different methods to warm them, including hot baths, heated blankets, and body-to-body contact. Many prisoners died from exposure or failed treatments. These experiments were performed without consent, aimed to help German soldiers survive cold climates, but inflicted immense suffering and death. Joseph Mengele's twins. In Auschwitz, Dr. Joseph Mengele, infamously called the Angel of Death, conducted brutal experiments on twins to explore genetic inheritance. He selected twins upon arrival, then subjected them to eye injections, forced organ transplants, and simultaneous vivisection. One child would be killed so the other could be dissected for comparison. No anesthesia. No consent, just raw, dehumanizing cruelty under the pretense of scientific study. Many died from infections, shock, or trauma. Mengele kept meticulous records but destroyed much of them while fleeing. His atrocities remain among the worst violations of medical ethics in history. Unit 731. In wartime Manchuria, Japan's Unit 731 operated as a covert biological and chemical warfare research center, using human beings, mostly Chinese civilians and prisoners of war, as test subjects. Victims were infected with anthrax, plague, and cholera to test germ warfare tactics. Some were dissected alive, called human vivisections, without anesthesia, to observe organ failure in real time. Limbs were amputated and reattached in unnatural position. Frostbite was tested by freezing limbs and smashing them with hammers. Over 3,000 people died in these experiments. After the war, many responsible received immunity in exchange for handing over their data to U.S. intelligence. Willowbrook State School Hepatitis Study. Between the 1950s and 1970s, Willowbrook State School in New York housed children with intellectual disabilities who were intentionally infected with hepatitis virus to study the disease's progression and test vaccine. Parents were often coerced into consenting under the false promise that their children would receive better care. The infected children suffered severe liver damage, and many experienced long-term health problems. The experiments prioritized scientific data over the children's welfare and consent. This study raised serious ethical questions about research on vulnerable populations and the exploitation of institutionalized individuals. The Chimera. Deep within the Soviet secret police system, the Chimera, or Laboratory 1, was a covert poison research facility tasked with developing undetectable toxins for assassinations. Prisoners, dissidents, and political enemies were given poisons like mustard gas derivatives, curare, ricin, and a chemical known as C2 to observe effects on the human body. Victims experienced paralysis, bleeding, vomiting, or sudden death. Scientists meticulously recorded symptoms and survival time. One goal was to create poisons that mimicked natural causes like heart attacks or strokes. The experiments were conducted without consent and often ended fatally, hidden behind state secrecy for decades. Guatemalan Syphilis Study. Between 1946 and 1948, U.S. government researchers deliberately infected over 1,300 Guatemalan people with syphilis, gonorrhea, and chancroid without their knowledge or consent. Prisoners, soldiers, mental health patients, and orphans were targeted. Sex workers who were already infected were instructed to have contact with inmates, or researchers applied bacteria directly to wounds and genitals. Many subjects were never treated, and the long-term health effects were ignored. The study aimed to test the effectiveness of penicillin, but instead violated every principle of ethical research. The experiment remained secret until 2010, when it was exposed and officially condemned by the U.S. government. Holmesburg Prison Experiments. From the 1950s to the 1970s, Holmesburg Prison in Philadelphia became a laboratory where inmates were used for dermatological and pharmaceutical experiments. Under the direction of Dr. Albert Kligman, prisoners, mostly black men, were exposed to radioactive isotopes, dioxins, a toxic compound in Agent Orange, and industrial chemicals. Some had their skin deliberately burned or blistered to test healing agents. Others were given injections without knowing the full risk. Inmates were paid small sums, but there was no true informed consent. The facility operated like a human petri dish, where medical companies bypassed regulations by exploiting the incarcerated. Vipholm study. In Sweden during the 1940s and 1950s, researchers conducted the Vipholm study at a state institution for people with intellectual disabilities. The aim? Determine whether sugar caused tooth decay. Without consent, patients were fed excessive amounts of sugary foods like caramel, toffee, and chocolate, up to 24 pieces a day. The result was extreme dental damage, infections, and pain. Researchers observed cavity formation over time without offering preventative care. Though the study confirmed sugar's role in dental decay, it sparked ethical outrage. Subjects were treated as test objects, not human beings, in what is now considered a national scandal in Swedish medical history. The monster study. In 1939, at the University of Iowa, researchers led by Wendell Johnson conducted a stuttering experiment on 22 orphan children. Half received positive speech therapy. The other half were subjected to harsh criticism, ridicule, and constant correction to induce speech problems. The children in the negative group were told they stuttered, even though they didn't. Many developed lifelong anxiety, low self-esteem, and persistent speech issues. The goal was to explore the causes of stuttering, but the method inflicted psychological trauma without consent. Because of its unethical design, the project remained hidden for decades and was later labeled the Monster Study. Project 4.1. After the U.S. detonated a hydrogen bomb near the Marshall Islands in 1954, radioactive fallout drifted over inhabited atolls like Rongelap and Utrecht. Instead of evacuating residents immediately, the U.S. launched Project 4.1 to study the effects of radiation exposure on humans. Islanders, including children, suffered burns, hair loss, thyroid disorders, and long-term cancer risks. Many were used as test subjects without informed consent. Researchers monitored them for decades, collecting biological data while providing only partial or delayed medical care. The experiment exploited an unsuspecting population under the guise of humanitarian aid and scientific necessity. Human vivisections. In multiple instances throughout history, most infamously by Unit 731 and Nazi doctors, vivisection, or the dissection of living human beings without anesthesia, was used as a method of medical experimentation. Victims were cut open to observe internal organs during disease progression or trauma. Some were infected with pathogens like plague or syphilis and then dissected alive to trace tissue damage. Others had limbs amputated or organs removed while conscious. No anesthesia was given to preserve accuracy in physiological response. These practices offered no therapeutic benefit, only data extracted through pain and death. Vivisection remains one of history's most grotesque scientific violations. Torture and human experimentation didn't begin in modern labs. They trace back to the brutal courts of medieval kings and queens, where cruelty was often a tool of power, punishment, or twisted curiosity. From dungeons to execution chambers, rulers sanctioned horrific acts long before science was used as a cover. To uncover the origins of this legacy, explore our videos on evil kings and ruthless queens in the medieval era, where history's darkest experiments often began with a crown.